Hello, Taylor. Thank you for being here today, taking some time with us. Appreciate it. You have a lot of titles and a lot of roles, so I'll probably butcher or miss some of them, but you're a lay student at the St. Paul Seminary, which is a thing, which
Yes.
we'll talk about in detail here in a bit. You work at Nativity Parish here in the cities. What's your role there?
I am the director of faith formation.
Awesome. You own a hobby farm.
I do.
Where?
In Cambridge.
Called?
Triumph Heritage Farm.
Awesome.
It's an 80-acre farm.
Awesome. What else do you do? Oh, you have a full-time job.
I do. I work in biotech
Yeah.
for a company called Rigel. So it's all rare disease, small molecule inhibitors for oncology and hematology.
Yeah. You're training for an Ironman.
I'm training for an
You
Ironman.
did a shorter Ironman.
I did.
Couple.
Yep.
Right?
I do a lot of open water races because I originally trained as a swimmer.
Okay.
I won a Caribbean Open. That was pretty cool.
Holy cow. Yeah. Yeah, I was preparing for this today. I was like, well, we'll just like walk through her bio, and that will be a very interesting, hour plus conversation. But yeah, you're studying for your Master of Arts in Theology at the St. Paul Seminary, among all these awesome other things you do. Maybe to start, just, kind of your background. I know you're a convert, so how you came to the faith, and then from there, what maybe made you want to study advanced theology amid all the other things you have going on, all the things.
So how I became a Catholic is kind of an interesting story because I didn't grow up in a religious family.
Okay.
Like my parents are nominally Methodists,
Okay.
I would say. I laugh about this because I heard my mom once on a Zoom call recently say she was a practicing Methodist, and I've seen you in more Catholic churches than I have ever seen you in a Methodist church because she'd come to mass with me.
Yeah.
But neither of my parents are particularly religious, and so when we were growing up, I was born in the 90s, and they pulled like I think a very classic 90s parent thing of we're just going to let you choose whatever religion you want to be when you grow up, so none of us were baptized. I lived with my grandparents when I was 3 until I was 5, and they were Methodists, so they would take us to church, and I don't remember really anything about it short of I was a little kid and I looked like Shirley Temple, and I managed to convince the pastor to marry my Barbies at a restaurant, but I don't remember anything specifically religious, right? But when we moved from there to Minnesota when I was young, my neighbors would all go to church on Sundays and we didn't. And I thought it was very strange. And so I would go to church with my neighbors, but it was like all sorts of different churches. Like I went to an old apostolic Lutheran church with one neighbor, and I went to a Catholic church with a different neighbor, and I went to like just all sorts of different things. Right. Yeah. And I think I was curious about religion because other people had experiences with it and I didn't. And so I started reading a lot. And I read confessions when I was a teenager because that's a normal thing to do, right? That's a completely normal thing to do.
Augustine's
Confessions. I read the Summa. I don't think I understood it. Like now, having studied it as a student, like in theology, I was like, I think I was badly misinterpreting.
You read
this
it in
as a
high
child.
school?
I read parts of it in high school. Yeah, but I was really attracted to the fact that like Catholicism had all of this tradition and it had a lot going for it, and I liked the pageantry of it. I thought that was pretty fun when I was a teenager. But it's not like I routinely went to church, right? So then I graduated high school. I took a gap year between high school and college because when I graduated high school, I was already 3 years into college. And so I figured I had time, and I worked in rural Vietnam for a year.
No way.
Yeah, and I did like humanitarian work, and we built a clinic, and I taught English, and we worked with some religious sisters, and we would take care of children who were abandoned on the doorsteps of this place.
Gosh, no way.
And it was a lot of kids where if they would have grown up in America, it was usually a congenital defect. So they would have had some sort of surgery and they would have been fine. But that didn't happen where we were working in Vietnam. So they had very hard lives, right? Yeah. And it was just such a beautiful witness of the Christian faith that it made me a lot more interested in possibly becoming a Catholic. And then also we worked in an area where we would get all of these people who would come and talk to us all the time about how they felt like they were Christians, but they couldn't tell anybody around them because they were worried or afraid that they would face repercussions. So like one of the women that I worked with in one of the organizations, she was worried that if she told her husband that she wanted to be baptized, he would kick her out of the house and she would lose her daughter. So it was, again, like a profound witness of the faith, right? Yeah. And here I was just like I was living in Southern California before I moved there, like very different, right?
Sounds a little different, yeah.
Yeah, and then they took us to the cathedral in Saigon for the Easter Mass, like the Easter morning Mass. And there was a visiting priest from Southern California, so the homily was actually in English, which was really helpful because otherwise I don't think I could have followed along. Yeah. And this whole the Cathedral in Saigon is huge, right? And it was built by the French. And it's a little bit similar to the Basilica, honestly. I think that's initially what attracted me to the architecture of the Basilica.
Here in Minneapolis?
Minneapolis, yeah. And it was completely packed. And like we had to stand in the transept and everybody was like crammed shoulder to shoulder. And if you have ever been in Southeast Asia, it is brutally hot, especially that time of year.
Sure.
So we're like packed like little sardines. There's a visiting priest from Southern California who's giving a homily about the resurrection and being saved and how all of us are called to salvation. And there was a guy, like a very old man standing next to me who handed me this little card about how God calls people in mysterious ways. And I remember seeing like this whole thing and just being like, you know what? I think I'm going to be a Catholic.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And then I came back. I went to the University of Minnesota for college, and then I went to the Basilica to go to, at the time, RCIA, now OCIA.
Yep.
And I was a catechumen and received my sacraments the following Easter Vigil.
Okay.
So.
And how long ago was that?
12 years ago, March 30th.
Well, praise God. That is awesome. This random guy just handed you that card. He didn't say anything.
He never said anything. He didn't even say anything to me during the sign of peace. Like nothing. And he was standing directly next to me.
Yeah. That's incredible.
It was very cool.
How'd you get hooked up with that group in Vietnam, or like how did all that come about?
So I knew I wanted to take a gap year. I had a very good friend who was in a similar position, but they were Vietnamese, or their heritage was Vietnamese. And so they thought it would be interesting to go learn more about their culture. And I was like, well, I want to take a gap year too, so I'll go with you. And so we both went and worked for this various nonprofits. Like the two primary ones we worked with were called Project Vietnam and Giving It Back to Kids.
Okay.
And so it was primarily around getting kids who had congenital defects, like surgeries and things that they needed, and building medical clinics. And then we taught English on the side at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, anyone listening to this or watching is probably going through something, and America is certainly not perfect. But experiences like that kind of show you like how good we have it here, don't they? In some ways, and what kind of perspective do you walk away from that with?
Yeah. I think the greatest thing that I learned in that experience, because we dealt with people who experienced a lot of suffering, right? And in many ways. And it was beautiful to see families who would bring their children that felt like they had no hope, and to have that children restored back to life for them. It was such an incredible gift to see. But at the same time, these people had so much joy with so little, right? And like one of the silly things I always think about is they would make these river fish dinners for us all the time. And it was like the same thing. And we had to eat it every day. But these families were so excited to make it and like share and participate in this with us. Even though it was like, I've had river fish every day for 6 weeks and I'm really tired of it. But it was such a profound experience of joy and community, right? So it did give me a much better appreciation for like, I have it really pretty good here in America, you know?
I think I read you moved around a lot growing up. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how and where and what were all the places you lived?
I was born in New Jersey in Livingston because my parents both worked in New York City at the time. Okay. And then my mom also worked in biotech, so I came by it naturally, right?
Okay.
And then we lived in Michigan for a little bit. We lived in Minnesota for a little bit. We lived in North Carolina for a little bit. I graduated high school in Southern California. I lived in France for a little bit. I think there was one other one in there somewhere. I came back to Minnesota. I think that's it. I think that's everywhere I lived.
France, just kind of slip that in there?
Just for the fun, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. My last name's Croissant. It seems very fitting, you know?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I assume that is French.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
My dad's family's from Eastern France.
Oh, really?
So we grew up speaking French too, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, how many languages do you know? Just English and French, or?
I know English and French. I know Mandarin Chinese.
Okay.
Comes in super handy. It doesn't at all, but it's helpful in Chinese restaurants. And it's fun to know, right?
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of Vietnamese, but like conversational Vietnamese. Like if I had to have an academic conversation in Vietnamese, it's not going to happen.
Sure. Well, I can't even have academic conversations in English, so all good. Well, that's super cool. What made you want to get a master's in theology?
So once I went through RCIA and I became a Roman Catholic, I felt like I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And the person who was leading it for the Basilica said, oh, you should be a sponsor. And I felt like I really didn't know enough about Catholicism, so I started becoming a sponsor. And I did that for a couple years. And then I also helped with a bunch of liturgical ministries, and I helped with a bunch of other various things at the Basilica. Like I was joking, like a super volunteer, because I kind of just do whatever they ask me to do. Still to this day, even though I work for another church, which is kind of fun too. And then they eventually asked me to help be on the team to help lead OCIA. And it reached a point where it was like, I was also teaching classes. And I felt like the only education I'd ever had in Catholicism was RCIA. And at this point, it was like 10 years before. And I'd read the catechism and I read a bunch of stuff, but I had no formal education in it. Yeah. And I thought something that was structured would be helpful for me. I also love school. Like, this is my second master's, but I'm also working on my third one. So naturally.
As one does.
And so I thought it would be a fun experience just to come and learn about the faith. And that's really what drew me to it, was just a greater understanding.
And how's it been? You'll finish up this spring. I know you're working on your dissertation, you said, but you're getting to the finish line.
I'm getting to the finish line. I have loved it. It has been so much fun. Like, I thought I would just come away with like a better knowledge of the catechism, so that when I'm teaching faith formation or I'm teaching OCIA, at least I'm not saying something that's a heresy, right? Yeah. That was kind of my primary goal. I know.
Avoid heresy.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you teach the Trinity, it's very hard.
That's fair.
But I've loved it. Like, I've loved every class because you get to experience and see such a richness of the faith. And I think also, being a person who's a scientist, there's such a deep need in me to like search and understand and learn about something that's very satisfied by studying theology. And I think because I have a great love for the church and a great love for God, it's been a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah.
And I get to use all my weird side skills in theology, which I find very fun too. Like, I got to use all my fun knowledge of China and having lived in Vietnam to talk about ecclesial communion with the Catholic Church in China and the two different churches that exist. It was a great time.
Sure.
Probably mostly for me, not the person who had to read the paper, but still.
Dropping some knowledge there. Mm-hmm. Well, you saw even, as part of your conversion story, that true universality of the church. Like, I'm just thinking of when people think of Saigon, they probably think of like what's they learned in history about, the Vietnam War and stuff, but to picture this beautiful full cathedral or basilica there, like you said, that's, you kind of lived that.
Yeah. I don't think I have ever seen a church so full as that particular one, which was incredible to see.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll leave an impression for sure. So in your kind of day job in biotech, what is it that you do exactly?
So it's a very complicated thing, and half the time I joke I don't even know what I do.
You feel some days.
Yeah, but we primarily, so the company I work for is all rare disease, and it's looking at products that are for treatment of, there's 3 different ones. One is for chronic ITP, and it's a novel mechanism of action, so it's dealing a lot with like, how do you manage the specific patient population, what are the data endpoints, what's maybe additional safety information that we need to study or look at. If you're using it in a facility, there's lots of just different questions you ask. The other one we have is for relapse refractory AML, which is a very rare, very fatal blood cancer. And it's specifically for IDH1 mutation. So if anybody, when you took high school biology, did you learn about the Krebs cycle?
Yeah, I remember those words together.
Yeah, so step
PowerPoint
4,
slide somewhere.
Step 4 is when isocitrate dehydrogenase is activated, which is IDH1.
Sure, it's step 4.
I know. My undergrad's in biochemistry. Yeah. I know the Krebs cycle so well.
I'm sure you do.
And then, but it gets mutated and then it makes an oncometabolite, so it helps drive cancer formation. Okay. And so it's about 6 to 9% of patients, which is only about 1,000 people in the United States in any given year. Wow. So it's very rare. Very small patient population. And then the last one is a product we just acquired from Genentech about a year ago, and it's for RET fusions and non-small cell lung cancer and advanced metastatic thyroid cancer.
Cool.
So lots of cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm a molecular biologist, but I'm not a microbiologist, and people usually get confused about that.
Yeah, what's the difference?
I don't know anything about fungi or bacteria, like much smaller scale. Like I studied all genetics. It was all genetic engineering and like what does protein expression change, stuff like that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in there between that line of work and then studying theology, and you kind of alluded to this, there's something in there. I'm trying to think of the best way to frame the question, but it's about faith and reason and science, as science, but then also the things that maybe science can't explain. I feel like you can speak to the relationship between those two things and the dichotomy they're in maybe better than most. So when you have just kind of look at your life in these fields of study, I mean, how do you reconcile the differences between, faith and science? Do you see them as complementary, and how does that just kind of impact all these different things you're involved in?
I definitely see them as complementary. I think it's very funny because in all of my experience, especially teaching OCIA, the number of time I've had particularly young people say, "How can you be a scientist and a Catholic?" is like,
Yeah, there's a stigma with that, isn't there?
Yeah.
I feel like in our Catholic bubble, we're shielded from that sometimes. At least I am.
Yeah.
So that's a thing.
That's 100% a thing.
Yeah.
Or even like in my line of work, because you come across, especially with a lot of scientists, very educated people, it's very humanist, right? And so you have a lot of, and very materialistic, not as in like money, but materialism, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And so you come across this issue of if I can explain everything naturally, then there's no room for a God, right? Yeah. So what is the purpose of having a faith when that's been your experience? And I never think that I don't think they're in conflict at all. I think you are provided a fuller explanation. But I think part of the problem we have in the sciences is this loss of the language of philosophy.
Yeah.
And so when you run into an issue where you kind of need a philosophical explanation in order to explain what it is you're looking at. So like a perfect example of this is how do you go from brain function, like firing of neurons, to consciousness?
Sure.
Right? Or how do you go from a collection of molecules to something being an expressed protein? And as much as there is a natural explanation for that, all of these have something where there's something in the higher level of the hierarchy that you don't see in the lower level of the hierarchy. And you can provide a metaphysical explanation for that, but you don't have a natural explanation for that, right? But because science doesn't use that language, it's very hard for somebody to say, well, it's like, okay, I don't know, but that's how it works. I just haven't come up with the explanation yet. But so often I feel like it's almost like a language barrier. Like you can have conversations with people around, okay, what is a final cause, and then get them to look at exactly, okay, if I'm looking at a protein that has a specific function that is supposed to be a certain way, don't you think that's kind of like a final cause, right? And give the language so that you have this very full explanation.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be too confusing about it. This is the thing I love learning about.
Yeah. Well, no, I think there's a lot there. Mm-hmm. I think the consciousness argument is a good one. Mm-hmm. How would you kind of explain maybe that discrepancy there?
So these are all things in science that are called emergent properties. So do you know what supervenience is?
No.
Okay, so supervenience is like if I have A and I have B, and B is the higher level and A is the lower level, if I change B, I must necessarily change A.
Okay.
Because they always have to be in relationship. So like if I, for example, proteins and genes are a good example of this. If I change the gene, I change the protein. But if I change the protein, I don't change the gene, right? So that's not mere supervenience. Like it's not explainable only by supervenience, right? But an emergent property is something where you say, okay, my higher level has something like consciousness or thinking or thoughts or expression that I can't explain merely by manipulating the lower level of the hierarchy. So like if I change your brain chemistry, it doesn't necessarily change, I don't know why I'm pointing like aggressively, but like it doesn't necessarily change the thought process. And so like I think, isn't this like what Father Spitzer talks about when you see like near-death experiences or people who have total cortical volume loss and yet they're still able to think and function normally?
There you go.
Because
That's
there's a function.
Great example. Yeah. Like, how do you explain that?
Yeah.
Father Spitzer's work is great. I was just listening to him talking about the Shroud of Turin the other day. Coming off Holy Week. It's Easter time now. So that was very good, very timely stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing some awesome things.
Yeah.
With faith and science. And have you ever thought about, I mean, maybe you have opportunities already to sort of have these conversations in your everyday life, but like, do you think there's more room for someone like you who has a really good grasp of both science and the faith to like start bridging some of these gaps that have been built up over time? Or how do we go about doing that?
I think so. I also think I still view it as like I'm very early on in my theological education, right? And I probably need a little more experience in it to be able to do it well, especially I think when you expose it to other people and now it's like, what if I'm wrong, right? I feel like knowing more has helped me at least to be able to have these conversations. Yeah. I also think that's why that's a particular thing that I love studying and researching, because I think so often when you have, and I mean this in the kindest way possible, when you have theologians that cover the topic of science, it becomes very evident that they don't have high scientific knowledge because, like, for example, I see this all the time with people who talk about evolution and all of the theories of evolution and the way that they treat evolution, and you're sort of like, you're making a lot of good theological points, but you're very wrong in your interpretation of the science.
Sure.
Because what you're claiming wouldn't make sense to a scientist either. Sure. Right? And those things are not in antagonism like the way that we think that they are, but you have to be right about both arguments in order to synthesize them, right? Yeah. So.
Are there other examples of things that, in your experience, you've found like, yep, science can only go so far, but it can't explain
Eucharistic miracles 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Like that's actually the best thing especially when you're talking to like atheists or people who have serious doubts about the faith, like, what do you do about miracles? And what do you do when you've had independent verification of these things and you don't have an explanation, right?
Yeah.
It's super impactful because now it's like, well, if you're never going to be able to provide a natural explanation for this. There are too many, especially when you have high technical knowledge and you think, okay, how did I go from a wafer to cardiac tissue?
Yeah.
Like, think about all of the things you know about science. That's not just manipulation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose. Any common person like me can recognize that something very fundamental and like crazy supernatural has happened there. But when you have the scientific knowledge to actually know what that would take at a molecular level, that's that's a whole different data set that you're working from. Do you have a favorite Eucharistic miracle story off the top of your head, or one that's like resonates? Or
I don't know that I have a favorite one. I feel like this has been something where I keep thinking I need to go read more about them, because you hear about them like, oh, they always test them and we know that it's like AB negative blood, and but I couldn't name maybe a specific one that's my favorite.
Yeah. It's always the same blood type, huh?
And it's always got high cortical presence, like somebody who's very, very stressed, almost like, they're being crucified.
Yeah.
Right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. It's so beautiful. It's let's see, it's Wednesday after Easter. So it's been 48 hours since Pope Francis, rest in peace, passed away. And then this upcoming Sunday was going to be when they canonize Blessed Carlo Acutis, Mr. Eucharistic Miracle documentary guy. I know that's been put on hold. And the Marian apparitions. And Marian apparitions. What a time to be alive, huh?
Right.
I don't even know exactly where I'm going with this question, but like, we talk about Eucharistic miracles. You've got a saint like, Carlo Acutis. We look back at Pope Francis' legacy. We look at the future of the church. But yeah, I mean, what's it, just from your perspective, like if you're interacting with non-Catholics or just people in your circle, like what's it like to be a Catholic right now, especially in all the different circles that you're running in your life?
It's kind of interesting, right? Yeah. Because I think, so being a convert and being that I was a catechumen and being that I moved here not knowing anyone, and Minnesotans are like a very insular people, right? Like they all know each other from the time they're 5, and it's very hard to make friends, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of made I promise this is related to your question. I made friends pretty much right away, and then I've had the same friends the entire time I've lived here. Well, none of them are Christian, right?
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing to be like, well, I have to go to Mass every Sunday, and I do these things for Lent, and I do prayers, and I study theology, and I do all these things that to my friends seems very foreign. And so then they start asking all of these questions around, like, especially Pope Francis, because they have a very secular understanding of what a pope is or what he was teaching, or, they come at it from the lens of politics. And so you're always sort of dealing with like, okay, well, a pope is not an American president, and there's more than the American church, also, fun fact. No way, right? It's almost like
you're on camera right now saying that, right?
Oh, no, sorry. But it's kind of interesting because you end up having to explain, like, why are these things so important? Yeah. But I do think that it's interesting in this time when we have saints like, or soon to be saints, Blessed Carlo Acutis and Pier Giorgio Frassati, right, who are young. So when you're dealing with young people and you're dealing with formation, sometimes you see a very strong connection to these people because they say, like, oh, they know what it was like to want to play video games instead of going to Mass, right? Maybe not for Frassati, he was before that, but at least for Carlo Acutis, right? And then you see some people where they're like, yeah, but they were just heroic in virtue, and like, I don't have that, and I don't identify with that, and it's much harder. But at least you have somebody who is modern and looks like them, and I think that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's very different in the circles that I run in because not necessarily very different. We all deal with this. We all know people who are not religious or who have issues with religion. Or I have a lot of friends who grew up Catholic and then for whatever reason didn't stay Catholic. Yeah. And they all have their own particular gripes with the church that you have to sort out. And a lot of times I do feel like it really is just a conversation that they're looking for, or it's healing from some sort of perceived hurt, which is another thing that has happened a lot. Or maybe some sort of misinterpretation that they had of the faith is a common one. But it's kind of interesting because I get both the like, I grew up Catholic and I don't want to do it anymore. And then for my job, I get the people who are like adamantly against religion as a concept, which is just very different. But
yeah. Runs the full gamut. Do you feel like the tide's turning culturally a little bit? I see more studies coming out now, like Bible sales are up, maybe church attendance is climbing a little bit, these different things. And I think when you go back to that there are things that science can't answer. Like people are searching. I think we know that, but are you seeing that?
100%. I also think that's why you see so many young people coming into the church.
Yeah.
Right. So like my friend and I went for the opening of Notre Dame in December.
The reopening?
Yeah. And the streets were just packed with young people.
Yeah.
Like packed. It was insane. Also, it was freezing and raining the whole time. And they're just sitting there to watch the Archbishop hit on the door and say, open the door, and then this beautiful light show, right? But they're just there to be a witness to that specific thing. And you look at even the numbers in the Archdiocese of Paris. I keep moving this.
That's okay.
You look at the numbers in the Archdiocese of Paris and how much it has increased, just the number of catechumens they have, and like 45% of them are between 25 and 39.
Yeah.
It's predominantly young people. Yeah. And the young people who come into the church are attracted to that Orthodox faith. They're looking for the truth, right? It's not quite like, well, I married, you still get this, obviously, but like I married a Catholic and it's just easier, path of least resistance. Like you see that some.
Oh, yeah.
But you get so many more people who were like, I'm looking for the truth, and this is where I have found it. Yeah. And so then they're much more faithful practitioners of it, which is great too. Yeah. Like I've even seen this in all the people that I've helped teach in OCIA, how strong that faith is now, and how many of them like lead Bible studies and became Eucharistic ministers and are deeply involved in the church in a way that like when I went through OCIA, I think there were 40 of us in the class, and I think I only see like 3 people at church still.
Sure.
Just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like if you're in, you're all in now. It seems like, because there's a lot of other different ways people could go, but having kind of the all in mentality is great. Is it weird being a lay student at a seminary?
Sometimes, but I love it. I think it's so much fun, and like getting to meet and hang out with the seminarians has been a great experience, and like getting to see who will be the future priests. I also think for me, because I didn't really know all that many priests beforehand, and you see just like they're human, like they're definitely human. But there's such a profound love of God there. Like, it's incredible. Yeah. So
I think, at least I've heard, it's good for those being formed in priestly formation to be in class with lay people, too. Because it's like, you don't just want to be in this bubble for 6 years or whatever it is. These are the people you're going to be serving, ministering to. So what's it been like to just be on the receiving end of that, I guess?
I think it's been great. I did have a funny experience with a couple of them once when they were talking to me about how they were learning rural ministry, and because I own a hobby farm, they were like, this counts as rural ministry, right? And I was like, no. Like, I grew up in a city. I don't feel like I'm your normal rural person.
Sure.
But I still feel like generally, because you figure when they go become parish priests and they have to interact with all of these different people and all of these different walks of life, it's interesting how much they try to relate to it. And you see it so much with like in every class, all of the seminarians that I've seen have done such a good job of meeting each individual person. They're so gracious with sitting and talking to them about various things. They're really good classmates because they share notes. Like that's been a great time. Loved that experience, right? Most of them are good note takers too, which is helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just been a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Hello, thanks for watching this video. I'm Father Brian Gross, Director of Pastoral Formation at the St. Paul Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. What we do here at the seminary is form men to be joyful, holy Catholic priests for you and for your family. The church is very clear. Forming a man to be a priest is the most important work that the church does because you need to receive the Eucharist, you need to have your confession heard, you need the good counsel and the holy example of good and holy priests. Here, the faculty and staff at the seminary seek every day to make sure that these men who are ordained priests are as good, holy, healthy, happy as they possibly can. Please donate to the St. Paul Seminary so that the work we do can continue for years to come. You'll find a link in the description. God bless you. Be assured of our prayers.
So how did you get into hobby farming?
So that's a fun... Okay, I feel like this is like the true story of my life. I do lots of different things.
You do lots of things, period. But yeah. Okay, yeah.
I think, something calls me to it. And farming was one of those things where like during COVID, I worked for a medical device company beforehand, and I worked, it was all in incision care, like dealing with wounds and stuff like that, which is very different than what I studied. It also meant that when COVID happened and everything got shut down, we only worked like 2 hours a week. And this went on for like a year. So I had a lot of free time, and things shut down in March. And by June I was like, I need a project.
2 hours a week is a pretty good gig if you can get it, though.
Yeah, but I was going
I'm sure
crazy.
that wasn't sustainable. Yeah.
No, yeah, it would be great, but
Yeah.
I was like, I need something to
bored.
do.
Yeah.
I was very bored. And so by June, I was like, I need a project. And I really like animals. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to buy a couple of cows on a hobby farm, and I'm just going to get little Scottish Highland cows, and I'm going to do breeding. And this is going to be great fun because I studied genetics and genetic engineering. And so I thought doing something in genetics and breeding would make logical sense. And so I bought a hobby farm, and I got some cows, and I got some pigs, and then I got some dogs. And for a while I had a bunch of ducks. And that's how I got started down the whole path of it. But I was really attracted to kind of heritage animals and heritage grains and heritage produce, the things that are more original and not just highly manipulated.
Sure.
Because generally they're very nutritious. They're also easier to grow, which has been really helpful. Once you get it established, you have to care for the land a lot in order to get it to that point. But like, for example, you can grow squash and beans together, and then you don't have to treat quite as much with like pesticides and things like that because they'll help naturally support it. So it's just been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a hobby farm. So
Yeah.
are you raising animals for meat or for production, or is it
Some, like
Okay.
I raised my Mangalitsa pork. Mangalitsa is a forest dwelling pig, and so they're very woolly like sheep.
okay?
And a lot of people see them and think they look very strange because they look like a cross between a sheep and a pig. But they make like marbled beef, like Wagyu beef,
Oh, okay.
or not beef, pork. They
Pork,
make
yeah.
it's like Wagyu because it has high interstitial fat content, and so it marbles. It is the best pork I have ever eaten.
Okay.
Loved it. So I did raise some of it, but primarily I've done breeding. So usually I've done selection for like specific genetic traits, and you're trying to enhance like snout length, interstitial fat content, meat production, stuff like that.
Okay.
Then I've sold off the piglets and the calves and things to other farms.
Okay.
Because I get very attached to my animals, and the idea of having
Yeah.
to process them is very hard.
Sure, I could understand that.
My dad had to help me take the piglets, or the pigs at the time, to be processed. And the whole time I was like, bye ham, bye
Oh,
spam.
yeah.
Like I was just like, this is not something I was meant to do. At least not the killing part,
Yeah.
right?
That makes sense.
So.
Do you have any insight on just through that type of work and then kind of your work in biology of like there's a lot of movement now. I think maybe the current administration is part of it, but there's been a lot of education around like how bad a lot of the food we eat is for us.
Yeah.
You know, is it as bad as some people say it is, or what can be done about all these processed foods and like there's tons of pesticides on things that weren't around 10, 20 years ago and different things. I'm certainly not an expert, but it seems like there's more public discourse about that than there's been for a long time.
I think because people are so much more aware of what you put in your body in
Yeah.
a way that like we didn't used to be, because you didn't really used to think about it, right? Like food was grown by a farmer and then you ate that, and sometimes it was processed into things,
Yeah.
and that just kind of was your diet.
Yeah.
But food now is so much more manipulated. So like I have friends who got their graduate degrees in food science and work for PepsiCo, and their job is to help make it just like a slight bit more addictive so that you'll want to eat more of it.
Yeah, that's real.
Yeah. But also, you think about, I don't want to call out like specific companies, but like, for example, most companies have some sort of end-to-end production model where they're going to get it from a farm into something that is processed in under 24 hours. So they maximize the return in that specific thing.
Yeah.
And the only way that you can achieve that is by using some sort of preservative that's not natural to the human
Yeah, it's
body.
about efficiency, not nutrition.
Right. But then, of course, the question becomes, as you're trying to decrease your costs and you're trying to make sure that you're a responsible company with a good income statement,
Yeah.
you're going to do some things that are not so great for the human body, right? And then we keep eating all this stuff that it's like, that really shouldn't be in your body.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think some things have gotten a bad rap and maybe didn't need to. And then I think some things that is definitely like, you should probably eat more regular fruits and vegetables than we generally do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a nutrition podcast, so we're not there. None of this is official medical
It's not.
advice. But are there, just given what you do know, are there a few practical steps like that you've tried to take or that people should take, even if it's like, tell me something I don't know, right? Like eat more fruits and vegetables,
fruits and
but
vegetables. Buy
there is
local.
some, yeah.
Yeah. Pay attention to where your food comes from is a
Yeah.
normal thing. And I even think about our Catholic values, supporting your own local place. And you think about the principles of like our Catholic social teachings and the things that you can do to support your own local economy. The hard part is it's expensive, right?
It is.
Farming is an expensive endeavor in and of itself.
Yeah.
Most farmers, have full-time jobs because the prospect of earning your living from the farm is no longer feasible. And so it creates kind of this dual issue of the food that they're going to produce is expensive because they're trying to support the expenses of the farm. But at the same time, it's probably better for you. So you kind of got to balance it out. But I mean, it's kind of like classic things. You should eat more raw foods, like eat more fruits and vegetables. You should make sure that you're not eating chicken that's been processed into some sort of gray type nugget all the time.
Meat.
Yeah. That's not the healthiest thing for you.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I like how you're bringing the Lord into it too. Like there is all this creation that we've been given, and it does seem like if you manipulate that or take, like, yes, it's here for us, we're to subdue it as it says in Genesis, but you know, any gift taken and manipulated too much or too far is probably going to have negative consequences. And I wonder if he's up there like, no, like I gave you all these good things to eat, like,
and it's in a form that's good. You don't have to keep doing this other stuff, right?
Yeah. It can be just the corporate commoditization of things run amok, I think. And but I think it's good people are talking more about it, you know, because like you said, but for a long time, I don't think we even thought about it. It's part of the discourse.
When you see so many people now where it's like, oh, I go to a farmer's market and I buy stuff from a CSA, or like you see a lot more like people shop at co-ops and people shop at like Fresh Time, right?
Yeah.
Where they're a little bit better about sourcing produce and at least eating the produce. Produce is great.
Yeah, so one of our New Year's resolutions is to start buying farm fresh meat from like straight from the farm, and I feel different. Like I feel better. It's feel
amazing.
Cleaner,
yeah. You know? It's the same with like when you go to Europe and you eat a bunch of like if you eat a bunch when you go to France because the food is amazing.
Yeah.
Right? The food isn't as processed, so you don't get as fat as quickly, and you're not
right.
As
They're not
tired.
allowed to put some of the stuff in their food that we are, right?
Yeah.
The regulation and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super interesting.
I also think some of it is just because like I see this with my own people that I know who are European, right? Where it's just there is so much more of a focus on the health of my body. Like if you think of your body and how you digest and how you feel, you know that you feel better eating whole, normal, natural foods.
Yeah.
You're more likely to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Do you have to be pretty disciplined with what you eat in terms of training for Ironman?
No, I'm pretty famously off. Okay, that's not true. I eat really well.
Yeah.
But you have to eat a lot when you're training like that.
You're burning tons of calories.
All the time.
Yeah.
Like when you bike for 6 hours or you go swim across channels, like the amount of calories that you're burning, and then you finish and you're like, you know what I could really go for? Bloody Mary, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't maybe the best thing after you swam for 2 hours.
I think you've earned it at that point, maybe.
That's what I always say. Because I'm like, I need the salt content.
There you go.
But you have to be really good about eating like a lot of protein and more carbohydrates than I think most people are used to. But it makes sense when you're training at a high rate.
Yeah.
Like if I don't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, I feel awful.
Sure.
It's terrible.
Yeah. I suppose whether you're training for a high intensity thing like that or not, it's just balance and like you said, watching what you're doing. So you're doing a full Ironman Italy when?
September 21st.
Okay.
September 20th.
So what does training for that look like?
So I have to work out like 9 or 10 times a week. It's like 16 hours. I swim less than most people who train for Ironmans because I was a competitive swimmer, and so swimming is the discipline that I'm good at. I'm a horrible runner, so I have to run a ton, right? I have to run like 5 days a week, and then I bike usually 3 or 4 days a week, and I do the long things on weekends when I have time.
Sure.
So.
And you've done some smaller, shorter events, you said? Or okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Little shorter triathlons.
How did you swim in like through high school, or did you swim in college at all? Or
so I swam all the way through high school, and then I was a butterflyer when I swam in high school. And I'd originally I thought about swimming in college when I came back from Vietnam, but I had really badly destroyed my shoulder, and I had to go through a lot of treatment and therapy for that because I would butterfly in the ocean, and then I would also butterfly like 15,000 yards a day, which is a lot, right?
That's a ton for that stroke.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was in great shape though.
I bet.
Right?
Holy cow. Yeah.
But it killed my shoulder. And so after having to go through all the fixing that, I just didn't have the motivation again to swim in college. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go be a student.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I graduated on time, which was great. But then I didn't swim and I didn't want to do anything. And then when I got to be like 27, I was like, you know what I should do? I should start swimming again. And then I got into triathlons and open water swimming and doing all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
So
why are you doing it in Italy?
Because I feel like if you're going to go do an Ironman and you need to eat a lot of pasta before, there is no better place than Italy. Also,
That's
you
fair.
bike through Ravenna, which I think is so
really?
cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm sure the scenery is awesome.
You swim through the Adriatic.
Okay.
And I get really freaked out swimming in dark water. And like the Adriatic is very murky, so when you put your hand down, you can't see the end of your arm.
Oh,
and I'm like,
man.
ooh,
Yeah.
gonna get eaten by a shark. But you know,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's sharks in the Adriatic.
I don't either. Not an expert.
Me
but
neither.
well,
But
good
it's very
luck with
pretty
that.
and it's very flat, which is helpful too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's beautiful. How do you balance all these things? I joked
never
before. I was like, do you ever sleep?
No.
You have to sleep.
Yeah, I do. I'm very efficient. I'm very good
Yeah?
with time management.
Yeah.
And I also think I do a lot of things that I genuinely really love, right?
Yeah.
So like my family, sometimes I think because my family isn't religious, they have a hard time understanding the like, why do you do so many things for the church? And like, why did you choose to spend all of your spare time doing things for the church? And as tricky as working for a church can be sometimes, because I think anyone who's worked for a church knows you kind of just get handed lots of things and it's a
Yeah.
lot of work.
Yep. Yeah, everyone wears a lot of hats and
Yep.
there's limited resources like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And you get pushed beyond your limits in certain things, and you know you're dealing with very human people, and sometimes it is really hard, right? Because
Yeah.
the things that people bring to church and to that setting can be really emotionally very taxing. But at the same time, I love it. Like I love working for the church. It's a very life-giving thing for me. I think it makes me feel very connected to my faith and very connected to Christ, and so I find the energy to do all these things. Everything else I feel like is a little bit more like I do my job because I like science and it's a good time, right? And training I feel like gives me energy to do all the other things that I want to do. Farming is just fun when you need some time for a little break.
Yeah.
It's just outside with animals.
Your break
you know?
is farming.
It is my break.
That kind of sums it all up.
Yeah, I love it. It's great fun.
Yeah. Has your faith grown from being involved in all these different things and just kind of bringing that into whether it's your day job or dealing with God's creation or farming or training for an Ironman?
Definitely. Because I think even at the time that I was baptized, if you would have asked me to have a conversation about God with someone, this was like such a foreign concept to me. I was like, faith is a private thing that I do inside, and I go to church and I'm not going to talk to anybody about it.
Yeah.
And I think through the experience of studying more about it and then just seeing how much all of my life is connected to the church and how much God really touches all of your life, it's become such a more consistent common thing that I feel like my faith has both grown in its own expression of it. Like my prayer life is much stronger than it ever was when I was just sort of sometimes being a sponsor, and I went to mass routinely. I was always good at going to mass routinely, but wasn't good at praying all the time. It's definitely grown a lot in really all aspects.
Yeah.
Being involved in all these things.
Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
This is your second master's? What was
Yeah.
the first one in?
Molecular biology.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you say you're going to get another one? Because 2 is not enough?
My job is having me get an MBA.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where are you doing that at?
At Carlson at the University of Minnesota.
You got in, huh?
I did.
That's an achievement in and of itself. It's
is.
a great business school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when do you start that?
I started it at the same time I started this master's.
Oh my gosh.
But I do that much slower, so I only take one class at
You
a
can
time.
pace yourself kind of
Yeah.
as quicker stuff as you
Yeah.
want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I'll finish eventually.
great. Eventually?
Mhm.
Why'd they want you to get an MBA?
It was kind of like to ever be a product manager or to be involved
sure.
with the anything in leadership in biotech. It's expected that you would get an MBA,
Yeah.
so
Kind of the next step. Yeah.
very logical.
Where do you see yourself going from here? Like in bringing all these things together? Or is it
You know, I ask
where
myself
you're
that.
supposed to be? Yeah. We're all
all
kind
the
of always
time.
asking ourselves that.
Yeah. I remember it was very funny to me thing that Dr. Washburn said in my ecumenism class, where he was like, trying to understand God's plan for your life is like building a table one plank at a time, but you don't have the plans for the table, right? And I was like, I feel like I just have a bunch of toothpicks and I'm trying to make a plank most of the time. But I do think that I could see myself doing something more with the intersection of faith and science. And I'm very involved with the Society of Catholic Scientists, and I'm helping with someone else I know who works at 3M, and we're trying to make a local chapter and just doing more around that dialogue, especially in the Archdiocese, because we have such a rich, we have so many people here who are faithful scientists and are very Catholic, and there's a very strong dialogue that we have, but it's kind of like we have all these resources scattered to the winds, and we really need to gather them in one place.
Yeah.
So I could see myself doing more with that, but I'm still trying to discern what my next steps are, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah.
A few different avenues, especially if you're getting your MBA. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
Mhm.
you have a favorite course that you've had in your master's now that it's almost over?
I did really like ecumenism. I thought that was a wonderful.
Which is what?
The relationship of the Catholic Church to the other Christian denominations.
Oh yeah, sure.
Which was really a good time.
Yeah.
And I had Dr. Washburn. I think I learned the most in that class, which was probably helpful.
Sure.
The other one I learned the most in, I had Dr. Gavriluk, and it was my very first class I took here, and it was called Paths to Holiness. I don't think I've ever read so much in my life as I did for him. And he would just ask questions. He is absolutely brilliant, right?
Yeah.
But he would just ask questions as though you, of course, completely understand and can be involved in this conversation. And I was like, I have no idea what we are talking about right now. But it was the same thing. It was all about, what is Christian perfection and how do we achieve it? And I thought that was a very beautiful way to start this program.
Yeah.
And it's been something that's served me really well, being involved in formation of people too. So
sure.
Both of those.
What is Christian perfection and how can we achieve it?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. Yeah. There's a great document you can read from Pope Francis.
Yeah.
May he rest in peace. That's Gaudete et Exultate, and you can learn more about it that way.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
But like, for example, one time he asked us about deification and all of the Christological heresies. And since this was my very first semester here, I was like, I know some Christological heresies. There was no way that I could be like, well, if I was an historian, what does that mean for deification, right?
Right.
I still don't know that I could answer that, but
yeah, no,
it was a good experience.
There's a lot that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
So. Well, great. Looking at my notes, seeing if there's anything else I wanted to make sure we touched on. But should everybody study theology in some way? Some way, shape, or form. Not everyone can get a master's, I don't think, or is called to. Maybe they should. I don't know.
They should, yeah. I don't think everyone is called to a master's. I think that. Well, and I think that's part of God meets us all where we're at, right? Yeah. Not everybody has that very academic or very understanding seeking faith, right? I think somebody who's a great mystic, maybe the study of theology isn't quite what they would be nourishing for them or would be useful to the church. But at the same time, that's at the graduate level. I think everybody should study it a little bit because I really believe in what St. Bonaventure says, that theology is faith-seeking understanding. Yeah. And I think all of us want to understand our faith in some way. Whether it's technical theological understanding is maybe different.
Sure.
But at least in some small way. Even just reading scripture more. I'm a huge fan of people need more scriptural literacy. I think that's an important thing. And just understanding how it works, I think, is helpful. And even with sacraments, like in our sacramental understanding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You would have liked the talk Dr. Mary Healy gave a floor above us just yesterday. It was all about that. It'll be on YouTube soon. Same YouTube channel, so we'll be sure to get it out there because she called for, we've got this Eucharistic revival going on right now. Praise God, it's incredible. She said after that, let's get a biblical revival going, scripture, and kind of come back to our roots in some ways, scripture and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. It's certainly an exciting time to be a part of it. Well, thanks for sharing your story and all this time, and best of luck with all the things you have going on.
Thank you.
Do it again sometime.
Mm-hmm.